lived and worked in Ukraine for 23 years. I came to Ukraine in 1999 for 6 months, and 23 years later, I'm still here. It's a great country, and I've obviously spent a good deal of my life here, but I learned to speak Ukrainian, speak Russian as well, and have worked on various U.S. government projects as well as in the private sector. In non-wartime, I have a public relations, government relations company based in Kyiv. It's a boutique with about 8 people. So let me let's see here. Oops. All right, just a second. All right. So Operation Help Ukraine 22, who we are. So we are a project administered by a US 501c3 based in the state of Florida. The 501c3 has been around since 2010. It had initially a election observation focus and worked to prevent election fraud and problems, worked to improve election administration in Eastern Europe and particularly Ukraine. But we all realized after February 24th, there weren't going to be anything close to democratically free and fair elections in Ukraine if something wasn't done. So we expanded our scope to a wider humanitarian mission and launched the project. Our focus was real simple from the very beginning. We wanted to fill immediate gaps in humanitarian aid. There's a lot of big international organizations out there. A lot of them are doing stuff outside of Ukraine. A lot of them have even billions of dollars. But we wanted to address immediate gaps, fill those needs, and get it done as quick as possible. So we focus on relief, resupply, and rescue of Ukrainians in need. In the first, I would say, from February 24th to the end of March, the focus was on rescuing Ukrainians and getting Ukrainians to places of safety. Things that was the focus. The needs changed, though, particularly as this war has changed from a siege of Kyiv to a battle on the Donbass steppe to now a Ukrainian counteroffensive. So the needs are changing, and the humanitarian needs are changing also. We made a decision early on to focus entirely on humanitarian and medical assistance. There's others like other groups that do a good job in providing body armor and lethal aid and so forth, but we wanted to keep the mission very focused on humanitarian and medical. So we do resupply of humanitarian and medical goods. That has been a big part of what we have done. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. We also have provided relief for whether it's internally displaced people, IDPs, inside Ukraine, or support for organizations that are doing real work inside Ukraine to get aid where it's most needed. We're not concerned so much as if we get the credit as we are about that the aid gets to where it needs to be. And then more recently, as there's some signs of optimism in the war, we're starting to pivot a bit to rebuilding and helping Ukraine. Obviously, that will be done on a huge macro level and a lot of international partners, but on a micro level, we want to help where we can. So Help Ukraine 22, we are based on the ground in Ukraine, based in Kyiv. We have an office in Kyiv. We have a supply depot of sorts in Warsaw. We have almost all of our staff now is in Ukraine. We have a few people that fly into Warsaw, and we take them into Kyiv or Lviv and other places, but it's for the most part, 90% of our operations are now in Ukraine. As I mentioned, we have people with backgrounds in government, business, diplomacy, military, medicine, as well as charity work. And for security reasons, we keep the names and faces of many of our operations team confidential. What makes us a little bit different from other groups is that we have, 2 decades of experience in country, not just myself, but my colleagues. We have about 40 full-time volunteers, probably 2/3 are Ukrainian, about 1/3 American. And these people have, donated their time, their energy, reached into their own pockets, and have done this work to help Ukrainians that have been in need. We speak the language, we know the country, we know the NGO partners, and which organizations are real and which ones are simply grant eaters for Western grants, which we avoid those obviously. And look, we experienced the daily air raid sirens. Our team has spent time in the bomb shelters, particularly in the early days during the siege of Kyiv. So our motivation is to help Ukrainians that need it. We focus probably 98% of our efforts on Ukrainians inside Ukraine. There's obviously there have been more than 8 million refugees, of course, during this war, and that's an important need too. But there's also foreign governments like Poland and Germany and others who have been helping the refugee problem and trying to meet those needs. So we try to focus on Ukrainians inside Ukraine, simply for the fact that if they stay in Ukraine, they still have needs, but they're more likely to stay in Ukraine, post-war. If they become a refugee, there's a higher risk that they would leave the country. Just for example, in Poland, they had about 4 million refugees. The Polish government, speaking to members of the Polish parliament in the Sejm from the ruling party, they had estimated that about half have gone back from that 4 million. But from the remaining, now it's about 1.7 million, they estimate that 400,000 Ukrainians will never go back home. So that's going to have certain impacts, and that's just in Poland. That's not even counting Germany, Romania, and other countries. So we do focus most of our efforts on Ukrainians in Ukraine. And we also vet our NGO partners with the Association of Ukrainian Charities, which is a watchdog organization that has been around in Ukraine now for about 15 years. They kind of give the good housekeeping seal of approval for charitable organizations to meet certain standards for low administration cost and doing real work that helps people. They're particularly well connected in the region. So we're also able to vet our NGO partners through them, as well as through some of our U.S. resources, kind of on the legal side in terms of background searches and due diligence. We don't get any government support. All the money we raised is private sector. Very simply, we see needs, we fill those needs, and we don't wait around for permission or paperwork. So to date, we have completed almost 120 different projects. And we say projects, meaning support for a hospital or medical institution, or partnering with an organization that's providing aid of some sort. So we've got essentially 120 different NGO or medical partners that we've partnered with. To date, we have delivered 1.75 million of humanitarian and medical aid to Ukrainians in need, and that's over a 6-month period. During that time, we've evacuated about 4,200 Ukrainians in total. Close to 400,000 Ukrainians have been helped in some shape, form, or fashion. And then in terms of donors, a lot of our donors are, we've had about 1,200 donors, $1,300 average donation size, and 98% of those are from the United States. We have some from the UK, Australia, and Europe, but 98% are from the US. And most interestingly is that 98% of our donors, our donor base, are from outside the diaspora. So they're not Ukrainian Americans per se. They're the average Joes who took an interest in Ukraine and saw what was happening and wanted to do something to help. So that we also believe that's a strength, because that sometimes the diaspora gets overtasked with an overburden, particularly during wartime, with the need for donations. So we're glad to help bring the situation to different people outside of the usual the traditional Ukrainian American community. Some of the highlights of the work that we've done together with North American Rescue, we've been able to get some top quality international first aid kits. We've gotten those delivered, life-saving tourniquets as well, which we helped deliver to the military, as well as those folks on the front lines. We've also sponsored training on how to administer a tourniquet, particularly for young people. So that's not something taught in schools in Ukraine, although I think it will be in the future. So we've also done a lot of work in doing that. Everyone heard about the atrocities committed in Bucha and Irpin, these suburb communities, these sleepy suburb communities outside Kyiv, which everyone wanted to live in. I know in my own case, my wife was telling me 3 years ago, we need to buy a place in Irpin. It's a beautiful place. It's just outside the city, and thankfully at the time we ended up buying a place south of the city, going towards Odessa. So we were fortunate in that regard. Unfortunately, the people in Bucha and Irpin were not. As we know, not only were there mass graves discovered, but countless women were raped. And don't even know where to begin with that. But rape was obviously used as a tool of Russian aggression, particularly in Bucha and Irpin and the surrounding communities of Kyiv. Just less than 2 weeks ago, I was in Bucha, right behind the central church there. They had discovered 130 people buried in a mass grave. And so I had gone to lay flowers at that memorial. So the atrocities in these sleepy suburb communities were just awful. We did, though, however, provide free medical gynecological exams for women who were raped or sexually abused. We were as far as I know, we were the first NGO to do that. We partnered with a local medical clinic in Kyiv. It was promoted through Facebook, so that women could simply send an email or call a phone line, have their identity protected, and then they could receive a free gynecological exam to one, give them a proper diagnosis of if they had contracted any venereal disease. Secondly, to treat any damage that had been done, and of course, third, to diagnose if any of them were pregnant. So we provided that service for about 70 women in the springtime, starting in about May, late April and May. In addition, we've delivered 3.4 tons of medical supplies early on to Rivne. Rivne is halfway between Lviv and Kyiv. It was important early on because there was a large amount of the supplies crossing the border from Poland into Lviv, but then getting bottlenecked in Lviv. So we went a little farther to the east. Through relationships that I had with the mayor and governor in the city, we were able to partner with them. They're often in an overlooked region. And so with the supplies we were able to ship to them, they were able to get those to the front lines and other places where they were needed quite quickly because they didn't have the oversupply that Lviv had in the early days. We've sent supplies to Donbass. In the early days, we got supplies into Severodonetsk, Mariupol, cities which are on the front lines or have been occupied since that time. And particularly, we've done a lot of work to get medical supplies into Kharkiv. In one of the kind of the happier stories along the way is there was a milk producer, a woman who was an entrepreneur who had several cows and was producing milk. And, the war was getting close to her where she lived in Donetsk, and she wanted to do something. There were already a ton of people fleeing Mariupol and other regions and going through her city. So rather than let the milk spoil, she came to us with a proposal. Said, "Look, I need basically about $1,700, $2,000 to convert this excess milk into cheese. We can make 80 kilos of cheese, and then we'll supply that to the internally displaced Ukrainians as they're going through, because obviously the cheese will last longer than the milk. So we started partnering with her to do that. When we do partnering with local organizations like this, we tend to focus on the micro grant. We do grants as small as $500 up to 5,000 or maybe 10,000. But we prefer to keep to reach an audience that is not going to be reached all the time by the big donors, but try to reach some of the smaller groups and organizations and people who are doing good work, but maybe don't have access to a lot of the big international donor base. So we were pleased to help with that. That woman later had to flee Donetsk, and then she relocated to central Ukraine, and she's again resumed the production of cheese for people who are transiting through and have been displaced by the war. We've supported almost 20 hospitals and medical clinics: Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Rivne, Kyiv, Lviv, and as well, with a focus on children's hospital, emergency surgery, and meeting the needs of those who are transiting through. That's been everything from buying a surgical bed in Dnipro because they didn't have enough because of all the wounded soldiers and civilians that were being sent there, to supporting children's hospitals in Zaporizhia, which everyone is familiar with now because of the nuclear reactor, Europe's largest nuclear reactor that's now at risk. We have provided dialysis for people who were internally displaced in Western Ukraine, particularly during the early phases of the war, so they could get free kidney dialysis. The war doesn't take a break just because you need kidney dialysis. You still have to get it, and then a lot of these people had to find other places to do that. We've also provided electrical surgery equipment which seals wounds. These kind of electric pins that help to seal wounds. We provided those to hospitals, particularly in the East. And then one of the early projects that we did, this was particularly critical during the phase where Kyiv and Kharkiv were under siege, and people were spending the night in bomb shelters in those cities. We provided free telemedicine for about 4,000 Ukrainians, and this was done through a network of 250 volunteer doctors, 24 different specialties, to pediatrics, to psychology. My wife's rheumatologist, so she helped her, and it was kind of a do-it-yourself. What do you have in your purse? You have this ailment. Okay, what do you have in your purse? Okay, you don't have this. What about this? You don't have this. Okay, ask your neighbor what the neighbor has in her purse, or what they have in their backpack. And so we were able to provide free medical consultations for about 4,000 Ukrainians in need, particularly during that first month and a half when the bomb shelters were quite active. What's interesting is, as a lot of Ukrainians have gone abroad, they are getting treatment, for different ailments, maybe not necessarily war related, but just regular chronic diseases and problems, or more acute problems. But what's happened is those doctors are still getting calls and contacts from the Ukrainians saying, "Hey, my Polish doctor said this, but the doctor was speaking to me in English. I didn't quite get it all. What would you recommend?" So they're basically coming back to the Ukrainian doctors in this network and asking for a second opinion, which is good. And of course, it shows both confidence in Ukraine, as well as I think everyone has a desire, when you have medical ailments, to be spoken to in your own language. So we're pleased that we're able to continue to assist in that way. We provide lodging and shelter for more than 2,000 internally displaced persons every month since March in Western and Central Ukraine. We're working with some of our NGO partners. We partnered with women's NGOs to provide psychological and psychiatric counseling for women who were sexually abused, as well as those experiencing just the trauma of a war. We also extend that to children because the children are having to deal with a whole level of stress which children simply should never have to experience in their lifetime. So we've been able to help about more than 1,500 individuals to date, through our women's NGO network, which provides that psychiatric and psychological counseling. And of course, food, medicines, hygienic supplies. We were particularly happy that we were able to get some of those medical supplies into a sanatorium or a mental hospital in Kharkiv region, which had kind of been forgotten. All the 200 some patients there are all suffering from severe mental retardation, and so we were able to provide the supplies that to keep the hospital going, help pay their electric bill for the month in those early days because the state aid was slow in coming at that point. And of course, we've been able to get people to safety. And that's what it was all about in the early days. The first, from the February 24th till the end of March, it was all about getting Ukrainians to safety. And then in April, May, it shifted a bit. It became more about getting medical supplies into people. By June, the hospitals they had enough medical supplies, but they needed more specific things like tourniquets and international or IFACs. So the needs keep changing, and as those needs change, we change what our focus is. So, for example, now we are beginning to transition and have been for some time to the needs that will be there long after the war. So one of the things that we're focusing on is how to treat the trauma and the PTSD that inevitably is going to be a burden, an albatross around Ukraine's neck for years, maybe decades to come, as people deal with the trauma of war, not just the military and the soldiers, but civilians who have experienced this trauma and these tragedies. So one of the things that we're focusing on now is raising money to send a cadre of Ukrainian psychologists and psychiatrists to the U.S. for training in the U.S. from top hospitals and professionals. This would be a program, a kind of a train the trainers program, where we would get about a dozen Ukrainian professionals who are obviously fluent in English, just to expedite the process, and then they would go back to Ukraine and then be required to do a train the trainers, where each of them would have to train 8 to 10 other peers in their field, so that the U.S. experience with PTSD post-Iraq and Afghanistan could be shared with Ukrainians to help them better transition in the months and years that lie ahead. Another focus is on procuring sleeping bags that keep people warm in sub-zero temperatures. Now, why sleeping bags? Real simply, the winter's coming. It's already weather-wise, it's going to be a cold winter. It was cold. Temperatures were cooling off in July, but more importantly, as Russia continues to struggle to make military progress, they have threatened and are believed to be focusing on gas and heating supplies and electric companies. So they're going to be hitting a lot of the heating infrastructure in the weeks and months to come, so that Ukraine has a particularly hard and cold winter. So sleeping bag is a small step, but it's portable. Unlike a building which can be destroyed by a rocket, rockets don't target sleeping bags. So this is something that people can take with them, particularly when they're on the move, and then they can move from house to house or building to building and use that sleeping bag. So that's one of the focuses we've had, and that we want to get those delivered to Ukrainians who are transiting from east or southern Ukraine to other parts of the country. And then finally, an ongoing need is the need for tourniquets. I remember in the early days of June, there were stories from the Ukrainian military about the military having to take use tourniquets off dead soldiers, and just to have enough to supply it. So that need is lessened in June and July, but at the same time, that's an ongoing need. So we are going to continue to make that one of our priorities assistance for Ukrainians in need. When most of our donors are individuals, we do have some corporate donors, but we do provide online monitoring and evaluation so that people can see donors can see the results of their work. They can get an idea of the impact, how many people it helped, where it was used, to organize the data, and it helps us to track these projects from start to finish. People and individuals, medical institutions can go to our website online, submit a grant application. The medical form is particularly easy. It takes less than 5 minutes. The NGO form is a little bit longer. It's a few minutes longer, but we bring up those proposals for consideration twice a week. Used to be 3 times a week. We're doing twice a week right now, and we give them a review and we try to figure out this. Does it make sense to spend the money here in Kharkiv, or do we wait, for another project and do it in Mykolaiv? So these are the kind of the questions that we go through with our board of directors a couple times a week, and we do our best to get the aid where it's most needed. And then at the bottom, you can see some of our partners. doTERRA has been a big help for us. American Warrior Partnership, Benevity, Rescue, the Association of Ukrainian Charities, MIST, which is a fan, went through the ministry. You can learn more about our work at www.hu22.org. It's hu22.org is our website. And you'll find information about our partners, some of the photographs of the work we've been doing. We're grateful for any donations. So we focus on getting 90% of all donations to programmatic activities. We limit our admin costs to 10% because we want to get as much as possible to those in need. And so that's the short story of Help Ukraine 22. We are gearing up for the cold winter that's ahead, and we are going to continue helping provide rescue, relief, and resupply for Ukrainians in need and filling those immediate gaps that are out there. Thank you for your attention. Be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Brian, stand by.
Sure.
another, particularly across Title 10 and Title 50. My experience in government was at the Defense Intelligence Agency for 5 years. And of course, that's essentially wears both hats. Is he back? Great. Oh, good. I can ask Brian this question. Hey, Brian, welcome back. Thanks. Lewis Shepard with a question. We've had over time a lot of challenges just in the United States about transitioning from whole of government thinking to whole of nation thinking. What you have been living now, particularly in this conflict, but as you said, even since 2014, the first phase of this particular war, is really whole of society operations. And that seems like a really a very daunting challenge in terms of it's not just Ukrainian or European society, but really a sort of broad swath of the larger world and that ecosystem. How do you see, what's the success perspective on that? Where are the challenges to continuing to support the information domain of nurturing whole of society responses on something like this? It must be extraordinarily time consuming to support just the information flow about the nature of the challenge you're doing, trying to garner support without the organizational support of something that a governmental effort would have.
Well, thank you. Yes, as we've noted a number of times, when we launched the project, we were building the airplane at 30,000 feet. I mean, we were, hammering on the wing as we were going out up in the air. That being said, though, we got through it. We put people in place, we put systems in place, and if something didn't work, we did it a different way, and so we've been able to rise to the occasion in our own way. That being said, the challenges are vast. I have as I mentioned, a small boutique PR company in Kyiv in government relations. So I was fortunate to keep everybody on salary throughout the war, and they're still on salary. And our clients are still paying, but I was able to convert everyone over. I said, look, you still have a job, but you're going to be doing humanitarian aid. So we shifted them all over to that. But I look at we have 4 men, 4 women that work in my office. The Ukrainian men are not able to leave the country for a long time. Those who are married, their wives and kids were outside the country in Poland. The 4 women initially left the country, and one of them has come back with their son. So, societally, that's going to have an impact. And you have a year of missed school, or, kids going to school now, but the schools have to have bomb shelters. And kids are getting used to studying in bomb shelters, which is just mind boggling. That on top of 2 years of COVID. So the effects on the society educationally are going to, be damaging as well. Ukraine is only beginning to have an inkling of what lies ahead in terms of the societal needs. And I will say this: when you talk to Ukrainians now, and whether it's my employees or friends or my wife's family, even, it's very much BCAD, and in terms of before the war and now. So everything in their life before was just a prelude to this, and so this is a clear marking line that is going to change society in a huge way. How will government respond to meet the challenges? Of course, that will depend on the government. Obviously the Zelensky government has done a good job of rising to the occasion during wartime. But as the great Winston Churchill found out, winning wars don't always translate into, electoral success. So obviously the challenges are going to be huge, and that ability to shift from, wartime needs to post-war needs as a society is also going to be a big challenge that Ukraine's also going to have to tackle.
Other questions for Brian? Going to do a time check here for our next speaker as well. I do have one other question myself, Brian, related to exactly what you were just answering. The information domain of multimodal warfare. We've got, maybe this is a final question. There's a change in initiative, right? A shift towards more success on behalf of Ukraine in the counteroffensive. Is the message about that going to permeate? You mentioned that you now speak Russian. Is will the Russian populace be getting the word about that, the successes of that counteroffensive? They've been told one story, which is that this purported special military operation is going very well and all according to plan. That's demonstrably false now. What do you think the information aspect from their side is going to be?
Good question. What we are seeing is, and there's both anecdotal as well as some, qualitative data on it, but young Russians are increasingly using VPN to get outside the Russian the bubble, right? The information bubble. You're in a country which is basically, you don't have Facebook, you have the Russian version of it, and which of course is completely compromised by the FSB and the Russian security services. So you have, I think, Russians at a certain point, it's logic. We were supposed to. They're thinking we were supposed to win this war in 3 days. It's already 6 months. What's happening. If you listen to the Russian talk shows, they have a number of very interesting spins on it. And of course, they've been very startled by the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv. But some of the spins that they put on it are interesting to listen to. For one of the spins was, well, of course we're having a hard time. We're fighting NATO directly, right? And that's a theme that they repeat more and more often. And I think they're going to have to repeat to make excuses for why they were not able to, capture Kyiv in 3 days. By the way, I know restaurants in Kyiv, restaurants that I go to in Kyiv, that receive phone calls on the days before the war, asking for a reservation to book out the entire restaurant on February 26th, which would have been 3 days from the start of the war, for a celebration party. And it was they would they would give the division name of who wanted to, the Russian division name of which army wanted to book out those venues. There's multiple reports of Russians bringing decorative uniforms for parades in the early days. So the expectations on the Russian side, they were sold a bill of goods that this is going to be a quick in and out, and then we're forever going to have Russia and Ukraine together. We're going to be Slavic brothers. Obviously, I think the average Russian now is questioning that. The economic effect of sanctions is starting to take effect on society too. So at a certain point, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but at a certain point, you're not going to be able to fool all the people all the time. So I think the Russians are realizing that things are not going according to plan, and they're starting to ask the question why. One other little vignette I would leave you with on the Russian talk show side, and I think this is the most amusing explanation for why the Russians are saying they're not winning. And so there was this one debate between these talking heads, and they're saying, well, one of them gave the explanation. Well, of course, the Ukrainians are good fighters. Absolutely, they're good fighters. It's because actually they're Russians, but they don't realize it. So it's actually like we're fighting ourselves. And so that was the Russian explanation of why the Ukrainians are resisting so hard, is because actually they're Russians. And of course, we all know that Russia has a great army and so forth. So there's a lot of second guessing and a lot of spinning going on. And I believe even with the information vacuum that the Russian people, particularly those who have been abroad, who have assets abroad, not even necessarily the oligarchs, but just people who have been to Turkey or Egypt or to Poland a couple times. I think they realize not everything is as it appears in Russia.
That's great. Thanks. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Brian. Best of luck to you with the full effort of Help Ukraine.